Hey guys, I'm back with Who Was Milton Hershey? We're starting on chapter 7 today. Spreading the wealth. A few years after opening, the Hershey factory sold more than $5 million worth of bars every day. Today, that would be about $123 million. Milton didn't think he needed to branch out to different chocolate products. He was happy making chocolate in the classic chocolate bar shape. But in 1907, he created one new product that would become even more famous than the Hershey chocolate bar. Hershey's had a machine that dropped small amounts of chocolate on a conveyor belt. The candies were first called sweethearts. The story goes that when each drop hit the conveyor belt, it made was a small smacking sound. Milton heard the sound and came up with the new, better name. The Hershey's Kiss was born. Soon millions of the kisses were being hand-wrapped in the factory. Workers put a small tissue label on the candy. Then they spun it all inside a small piece of foil. Until 1921, every kiss was wrapped by hand. Hershey's mother, Fanny, who lived in a big house near the factory, still wanted to help. She had a box of unwrapped kisses sent to her every day. She wrapped them and gave them to visitors. Visitors to Hershey, Pennsylvania today can see that some of the town's street lights are in the shape of kisses. It was important to Milton that his chocolate was affordable. He wanted everyone to enjoy chocolate. For 60 years until 1969, Hershey bars cost only 5 cents, and you could find them everywhere. It used to be that a candy store was the only place to buy candy. But Milton told his salesmen to go everywhere: drugstores, grocery stores, lunch counters, gift shops. Anywhere people might want to buy chocolate bars. Milton and Kitty Hershey were very rich. They had built themselves a beautiful home and gardens on a hill overlooking the factory. They were beloved by the people of the town for whom they had done so much. The couple always missed not having children of their own, so the Hersheys came up with a way to care for and raise many kids. In 1909, Milton started the Hershey Industrial School for Orphan Boys. In the early 1900s, there was great concern over what to do for orphan boys. There were orphan girls too, of course, but in those days, girls could get jobs that didn't require much training. They became cooks or seamstresses or housekeepers. Boys, it was thought, needed more schooling to prepare them for jobs in factories or in stores. The difference in the way boys and girls were treated was not fair, but that's how it was. Hershey School was meant to give orphan boys the skills needed to earn a decent living. The school also gave them a home. Hershey himself had bounced from school to school. He wanted to make sure other boys avoided that. At the school, boys lived in family homes with foster parents. Other schools for orphan boys had big dorms where everyone slept in one room. Hershey didn't want that. He wanted the boys to feel comfortable and loved. The school accepted orphans from nearby counties. Some poor families that had several kids could also send their boys to the school to live and study. All the boys studied reading and basic math. They learned trades such as carpentry and farming. They also worked on the school's farm milking cows every morning. Because Milton Hershey also believed in having fun, Hershey Park grew and grew. He added a carousel, bowling alley, and a miniature railroad. There were concerts and shows, and in the winter, ice skating. Most of these things were free to the citizens of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Thousands of visitors came too. By the end of 1913, more than 100,000 people had visited Hershey Park. As all these things were going on in the town of Hershey, Milton and Kitty continued to travel wherever her heart allowed and her help. In 1912, they made another trip to Europe. Milton had bought tickets on a famous ocean liner for their voyage home. However, because of a business meeting, he had to change plans and take an earlier ship. That turned out to be an incredible stroke of luck for the Hersheys. The original ship they were to sail on was the Titanic, which was called the most luxurious ship ever made. The massive ocean liner hit an iceberg and sank on the way to America. Luck was with them on that trip, but it ran out for Kitty not long after. She was visiting friends in Philadelphia when she became very ill. Milton rushed to her side. After years of poor health, Kitty died on March 25th of 1915. Here's a little bit about the Hershey Park today. By the 1950s, Milton Hershey's lovely green park was his employees had bloomed into a huge amusement park. By the 1960s, however, it was all a bit run down. In 1971, the Hershey Entertainment Company made a big change. They put a fence around it and started charging an entry fee. Many people were upset at the time. Eventually, though, the new Hershey Park would become a very popular place. Hershey Park today boasts 11 roller coasters. Sky Rush is the tallest at more than 200 feet and takes riders as fast as 75 miles per hour. Visitors can choose from several water slides too, including the drizzling coastline plunge, vortex, and tidal force, one of the tallest water rides in the world. Hershey Park also has log rides, a monorail, an enormous wave pool, and a zoo. Located not far from the Hershey factory, the park attracts more than 2 million people each year. Here's a little bit about the Titanic tragedy. Milton and Kitty Hershey escaped tragedy by not sailing on the RMS Titanic. The ship was on its first trip across the Atlantic from England to America. At the time, the Titanic was the largest ship ever built and the fanciest. First-class passengers used china dishes and fancy silverware. They would swim in a small pool or play squash on a court. There were playrooms for children and showers in the staterooms, and an orchestra entertained passengers. One builder said that everything on board was the finest money could buy. The Titanic was said to be practically unsinkable. However, on April 14th of 1912, the Titanic struck a huge iceberg as it neared Canada and split in half before it sunk. There were not enough lifeboats to get everyone safely off. Sadly, more than 1,500 people died in the icy waters before rescue could arrive. Milton never married again, and he kept pictures of Kitty in every room in his house for the rest of his life. Twice a week, he had fresh flowers put on the grave of his beloved Kitty. Chapter 8, Life After Kitty. Milton missed Kitty terribly. In her memory, he did something truly remarkable, and he did it in secret. In 1918, not long after Kitty died, Milton gave all his stock in the Hershey Chocolate Company to the school. Since 1951, it has been called the Milton Hershey School. He also made the gift without telling anyone at his company. It was not until 5 years later that anyone outside the school knew about it. The news leaked within a newspaper revealed the gift. Milton did this to make sure the school would keep going long after he was gone. Today, the school still owns stock worth more than $9 billion. The Hershey School is richer than most universities in America. In fact, the school is so wealthy that in 1963, it could afford to build a hospital. The Penn State Hershey Medical Center is in Hershey and is one of the biggest in the state. The only rule Milton made about his gift was that it had to be used to help the students at the school. He watched over the school for the rest of his life. He treated the boys like his sons, and he would often visit them in their homes with their foster parents. They also came to visit Milton at his house and have tea. Once a year, he invited the whole school for a breakfast. Starting in 1930, the school has had a homecoming picnic for former students every year. For their part, the students loved Mr. Hershey. Much of the sugar needed to make Hershey chocolate came from the island nation of Cuba. After Kitty's death, Milton visited and fell in love with the tropical country. His mother, Fanny, had died in 1920, so Milton had less reason to stay in Hershey. So in the 1920s and 30s, he spent as much as half of his time in Cuba. He bought up several sugarcane farms. He built a factory to process the sugarcane into sugar for his chocolate. Then he built new houses for the workers on the farms. He also made sure the houses had electricity, which was very rare in Cuba at that time. He used the same generosity and creativity in Cuba that he had used in Pennsylvania. Hershey, Cuba. 90 miles off the coast of Florida, Hershey, Cuba was once a thriving sugar processing center. It was here that Milton Hershey built a beautiful little town to house and support the employees of his sugar factory and sugarcane fields. Just 35 miles from the capital city of Havana, the town had shops, a hotel, parks, and gardens, and its own train line. It was a lot like Hershey, Pennsylvania. However, Hershey sold the town in 1946, and sadly, it has not been kept up. Although most of Hershey, Cuba is now in need of restoration, about 200 families live there today. In the 1930s, America and the rest of the world went into an economic depression. Millions of people lost their jobs. Millions lost their homes. It was a terrible time for many in America, but it was not so bad in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Milton made sure that everyone in his factory kept working. If they weren't making chocolate, he found them jobs elsewhere. He put up several new buildings in town, then he built a huge sports arena for an ice hockey team. The duplex Hotel Hershey was completed. A massive new community building went up too. Today it is part of the company headquarters. Since his chocolate bars were still only a nickel, people could afford to keep buying them. The factory stayed open, and Hershey, the company in the town, survived the Depression. Hershey's go to war. In 1917, Milton got a chance to help the country that had given him so much. With American troops headed off to Europe to fight in World War I, he told the government he would provide chocolate bars for soldiers. They would need energy, he said, to do their work. Millions of bars were in the ration packets of U.S. soldiers from 1917 to 1918. In 1942, Hershey's created a special chocolate bar called a D-ration that would not melt easily. Soldiers fighting World War II in Europe passed out bars to kids they met. They also traded them with local people. The Hershey Company got several awards from the U.S. government for its work in helping soldiers. Chapter 9. A Chocolate Fortune Lives On. In 1937, Milton Hershey turned 80 years old. The town of Hershey gave him a big birthday party. They sang him a song and had a huge cake in the sports arena. For his part, Milton was slowing down. He let his managers take over running much of the company. By 1940, sales of Hershey products were $44 million, the highest they had ever been. In only 4 years, sales had almost doubled to more than $80 million annually. Meanwhile, Milton still liked experimenting. He tried making gum and chocolate pie. He tried making candy with raisins and molasses. He even tried baking new kinds of muffins. Making soap was one of his oddest experiments. He ended up making way too much, and it wasn't very good. He even tried to sell some himself from a shop in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He also tried to make ice cream less expensive by making it without milk and chocolate with flavors such as celery, turnips, or beets. Few of these items really worked. In 1930, Milton gave his own house called High Point to the town. It became the clubhouse for the golf club. In 1941, he hired Ben Hogan to work at the golf course. Hogan would go on to become one of the greatest golfers in the world. With more free time, Milton loved driving around Hershey. He visited the factory buildings and the school. At the company building, he sometimes sat underneath a large painting of himself. He hid behind a newspaper to hear what people said about him. In September of 1945, he celebrated his 88th birthday. A few friends threw him a party at the old family house. It was where he had been born and where he later created his famous milk chocolate. A few days later, he started having trouble breathing. Milton Hershey died of pneumonia on October 13th of 1945. Here's a little bit about Hogan and Hershey. Milton Hershey was the biggest name in chocolate. Ben Hogan would become the biggest name in golf. When Hershey hired him as the Hershey Golf Club head pro, he gave Hogan time to keep playing in tournaments. Hogan worked at the club for 10 years. In that time, he won dozens of events, including several of the sport's major tournaments. In 1949, he was in a terrible car accident. Many thought he could never play again. The Hershey Club supported him throughout his recovery, and he came back not only to play, but also to win the U.S. Open in 1950. Hogan's fame also made the Hershey Country Club famous. The course still plays host to top pro events such as the 2011 PGA Professional National Championship. The Hershey Chocolate Company has continued, of course. In the decades since Milton's death, the company has added new candies such as Reese's Peanut Butter Cups and the Nutrageous Bar. The company also bought other candy bars such as Twizzlers Licorice and Icebreakers Mints. It is truly a candy empire, and the empire was created by one man, Milton Hershey. That is the end, guys. I will see you again with a new book.